everybody. I'm Dana Torgersen, Vice President of Product Marketing here at ArmorCode, and welcome to our fireside chat. We're calling this Analyst Insights, Why AI is Breaking Your AppSec Strategy and How ASPM Fixes It. And joining me today are two amazing leaders in our AppSec community. First, let me introduce Mark Lambert. Mark is the Chief Product Officer at ArmorCode for our AI-powered ASPM platform. With more than 20 years in building development and security solutions for leading brands, he's an ASPM authority, and he's spoken at RSA, Black Hat, and other national conferences. He holds a bachelor's and master's degree from Manchester University. He hosts a security podcast, and he focuses on breaking down development and security silos to turn security data into actionable risk reduction. And our special guest today is Katie Norton with IDC. Katie is the research manager for IDC's DevSecOps and software supply chain security practice. She advises IDC clients on these fast evolving markets as well. Her research will cover the gamut from security integration and software development to DevSecOps adoption, ASPM, vulnerability management, and AI applications and security, which is, of course, a hot topic. She has a master's in research administration and experience as a senior data analyst at a startup and academic program analyst at Central Michigan University. Katie takes, and I think you're going to see this, folks, in the research that she's accomplished and the reports that she's put out. She takes a data-first approach to analyzing both buying patterns, looking at market trends, and helping organizations to secure their software factories in a nutshell. So with that, welcome, everyone.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you for being on here. Thank you, Mark. I know, Mark, you're traveling. Katie, I think you're at home.
Yep.
Excellent. Well, we're thrilled to have you here, and we want to discuss the ASPM landscape, share some of IDC's latest insights on the ASPM market. Now, as a bit of housekeeping, folks, we're scheduled this fireside chat for about 30 minutes. If you have any questions for Mark or for Katie, please feel free to enter them into our Q&A window, and we'll get them at the end of the conversation here today. So, of course, I'm going to bring it to Katie. Let's start off with you today. You launched a whole bunch of IDC research and reports in the last couple of weeks, including the first ever IDC MarketScape for ASPM. And that is a worldwide vendor assessment for 2025. So first of all, how tired are you right now?
Very.
Okay, good. And for those of you that might be unfamiliar, could you explain what an IDC MarketScape is and why does it matter for organizations who are evaluating different security solutions?
Yeah, of course. So an IDC MarketScape is sort of our signature vendor evaluation tool. I think you can kind of think of it, it's both a research framework as well as it provides a visual map of the market. And the way we do this is we combine both quantitative and qualitative insights, looking at things across strategy, innovation, technical capabilities, go-to-market approach. A variety of criteria are taken into account. And the output is sort of this chart you see here, right? Where the the y-axis reflects current capabilities. I often align this to, the technology itself. The x-axis reflecting strategy, particularly future-leaning strategy. And then, when vendors are sort of scored, in these categories, and then they fall into these four groupings of leaders, major players, contenders, and participants. You also kind of see on here, one of the unique aspects of the MarketScape is the bubble size. And that reflects sort of IDC's own estimate of that vendor's particular revenue for the solution in the market we're evaluating. And that is often very heavily influenced by the size of the company, and especially in the ASPM market in particular, reflected oftentimes when a solution is packaged as part of, say, a platform versus a standalone product. And, to your kind of second question here, Dana, why this matters for organizations evaluating ASPM, market evaluations like these and like the MarketScape, what they really do is help support informed decision making. They're not the be all end all decision maker itself, but what they do is really help an organization identify vendors' strengths and weaknesses in a way that helps them match a solution to whatever their own particular requirements are, and help point organizations towards vendors that are, reliable and aligned with whatever their needs are. And so ultimately that the MarketScape can really support strategic planning, ensuring that your IT and security investments, map to not only near-term technical requirements, but also your longer-term goals and organizational strategy. So really, in short, these, vendor evaluation tools, and particularly the MarketScape, really helps buyers cut through noise, understand the landscape around a particular technology, and help them select those vendor partners that are going to be best positioned to meet their own business and security needs.
That's amazing. Now, you've been tracking this space pretty closely, it sounds like, over time. So now you're probably in an awesome position to tell us, like, how has the application security market evolved over the past few years to where we are today?
Yeah, I think ASPM is a really good story for explaining, I think, how the market has evolved. Looking at the past several years, application security has really changed from being very silo tool centric and very fragmented to a much more integrated and risk driven approach. In earlier days, what I saw is that we had very separate products, right? For source code scanning, for open source library management, cloud misconfigurations, runtime monitoring, and so on. I could list probably 15 or 20 AppSec categories, right? And they're all useful, but we have been operating them oftentimes in silos, and that really leaves teams to juggle multiple dashboards. You often find, duplicated alerts. A SaaS tool and a DAS tool might be pointing to the same vulnerability or security issue, for instance. And really, when you have these silo tools, there's no way to see the bigger picture. And so what I've seen, especially in the last couple of years, expectations have really shifted that, a tool, it's no longer enough to just find vulnerabilities, right? Organizations expect solutions that help them prioritize those issues in context of their own individual, risk profile and business needs, as well as guiding them on how to actually fix those most critical problems quickly. And so I think that progression we've seen from just find to also prioritize and fix is what has been at the heart of the shift, and why we're seeing ASPM sort of rise as that unifying layer to help bring all of this together. And I think it's also important here to, we're talking about AI, right? If we really want to talk about now, in this moment in particular, and what's really changing things, we've got things like AI coding assistants and intelligent AI enhanced applications that are really reshaping the security conversation. What I've seen is that these tools have been adopted at rapid scale, and they've accelerated development. But, while they can, on one hand, reduce vulnerabilities and make developers faster, at the same time, they're also, expanding the supply chain. They're, they're creating more volume, right? If developers can code faster, you're naturally going to introduce vulnerabilities faster. So ASPM plays an important role here as well, providing that sort of contextual visibility and risk that's needed to manage all of this, where AI is both accelerating and, creating a new surface that has to be secured.
Okay. Mark, would you have anything else to add to that in the changes that you've seen across the market?
Yeah, I think Katie did a really you kind of like hit the nail on the head, is that it's gone from just finding the problems to kind of like, how do we fix them? But we know we can't fix them all. And it's the concept of application security is no longer just about the code that you're writing. It's about the infrastructure that code is running on, be it cloud or other heterogeneous traditional infrastructure. And then it's the software supply chain, right? So it's the components that you're using, which of course, software composition analysis plays a part in that. But there are, other things like SBOMs and, consumption from other third-party dependencies as well. And how can I bring all of that data together so I'm not playing whack-a-mole on the same issue in several different places? So yeah, as Katie said, prioritizing, but also correlating and deduplicating across the tools. And then leveraging kind of how can we leverage analysis, be it traditional algorithmic or heuristic based analysis, or be it AI driven capabilities that allow you to drive and accelerate and scale so that you can keep up to that pace of innovation that's coming from the development teams as well.
Okay. Speaking of driving, Katie, if I bring it back to you, what were the key inflection points that you've uncovered that were driving some of the changes that you mentioned?
Yeah, there's a lot of them, but when I really boil it down, I think there's sort of three really prominent ones. The first one is just the sheer volume of vulnerabilities. This is both just, the number of CVEs. We've seen that the growth in the number of those being identified and cataloged, but also to the point we talked about with the use of AI coding assistants and AI applications. It's just a much larger number of vulnerabilities that are leaving teams really unable to keep up. I've seen, ginormous backlogs of hundreds of thousands of vulnerabilities at large enterprises that they can never really make a dent in. And on top of that is that expanding attack surface as well, right? That, Mark and I touched on before, the cloud native architectures, CI/CD pipelines, third-party dependencies, all of these things we keep adding more and more, create additional entry points and, and with that, additional tools that are created to try and secure them. And then, thirdly, I think there's just overall a lot of limitations of, the CVSS scores and reliance on those. Those scores are not focused on things like the issues most likely to be exploited, or in particular, the issues that are most impactful and create the most risk for like a particular organization. Yeah. So I think when we kind of bring those three factors together, those have, what I've seen, have really, driven this need for a more centralized management of your application risk.
Okay.
And I think you really kind of dig into a piece there, Katie, which is important, which is as you're talking about prioritization, it's orientated on risk, right? So it's not just CVSS in a severity-based approach to prioritization doesn't take into account the threat actor activity, the things like EPSS or dark web scoring, so you can understand whether or not it may be exploited or become exploited, should I say, or CISA-KEV indicating that it is actually exploited. So we have this explosion of CVEs, but actually the majority of them aren't exploited. So it's like, kind of why bother if you've got like too many? Let's focus in on the ones that matter. And then let's, further focus in on those which impact the business the most. So something that's on your front end web application that's driving core business is more important than something which is a back end data sciences application. And being able to take all of that into account is how you ultimately get down to a true risk-based prioritization, kind of like as you were touching upon.
Yeah, agreed.
Well, Katie, you were kind enough to send over some of your research, and I have a slide here. Let me bring that up. This one here, yeah. Could you break down like how you're seeing the ASPM market, particularly around like there's cloud security, there's traditional scanner tools, and then there's the scanner agnostic ASPM solutions. Like what are the distinctions? Could you unpack this for us, please?
Yeah, I mean, this is a little bit of a crude diagram, but I think it really helps, I think really drive how it's part of the reason that drove me to evaluate and try to understand this space, because you can see there's a lot of entry points, right?
Yeah.
So when we look at it today, what stands out to me is all the different approaches that vendors are taking. And I think at a high level, you can, in summary, look at it sort of along a spectrum, right? So on one end, we see sort of like closed scanner-centric solutions, right? Where posture management is very tightly coupled with that vendor's own native detection tools. And, the advantage here is control, consistency. This model is often a good fit for organizations that are maybe resource constrained, already heavily invested in a singular vendor or platform, or limited AppSec teams or less mature programs, because sometimes this is often, couched as AppSec in a box, right? And then on the complete opposite end, you sort of have the third party or aggregator model, right? Where these are designed from the ground up to ingest findings broadly across not only scanners, but oftentimes infrastructure tools, development systems, cloud security. They tend to really resonate, I think, with large, complex environments. Oftentimes, organizations already have multiple scanners, even in the same category in place, but they don't have that connective tissue that ASPM can bring. And then sort of in the middle of that spectrum, obviously, we have sort of the hybrid approaches that combine native scanning along with the ability to ingest from outside tools. This gives organizations that out-of-the-box coverage, but also that option to pull in additional sources. This can often sometimes add like fidelity to the data that they're working with, or organizations that are maybe exploring tool consolidation, or they just are looking to enhance or fill in gaps without abandoning the investments they've already made, right? So in general terms, different categories of vendors tend to land at different points along the spectrum. Oftentimes we see vendors that have traditionally provided application security scanning and testing often sit closer to the more closed first party side. And then, CNAP and the DevOps platform players, they tend to fall in the middle here. Sometimes they have their own scanners, but maybe not, an entire suite. And then they're also connecting in and partnering with other tools. Exposure and vulnerability management, oftentimes ASPM is sort of a use case within these larger platforms. So they tend to lead third-party centric as that's sort of the origination and base of those sort of tools. And then we just sort of have this pure play ASPM category, right? Vendors that they are delivering, solely an ASPM solution, and they tend to span the whole spectrum, right? Some operate as open aggregators, while others are moving more towards that hybrid or, closed model. But most ASPM centric tools tend to at least have some third-party integrations.
Okay, makes perfect sense. Mark, for instance, I know that you get to speak with a whole host of organizations all day long, experiencing complexity, all these AppSec challenges. From a customer perspective, how do you see these different approaches that Katie laid out playing out across enterprise-sized environments?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I think Katie touched upon it really well. It's like when you have a large enterprise organization, their environment is typically complicated, and they've already made a number of investments. So this is why at ArmorCode we focus on the pure play ASPM. So we don't have our own scanner. We leverage the investment that those organizations have already made, and we build a connective tissue across those tools that are there. So while you may have a best-in-class CSPM, you also want to leverage a best-in-class SaaS tool or SCA tool from another vendor, and you want to be able to bring that data together. Really, it does tie in with those larger enterprise organizations, typically larger financial organizations or institutions that way, and that's one of the reasons why we have so many out-of-the-box integrations within the ArmorCode platform. So we're now over 325 different integrations, everything from threat modeling and the AppSec stack all the way through cloud, container, traditional infrastructure, bringing in the threat intelligence feeds that we were just talking about a few moments ago to assist with prioritization, as well as asset inventory, bringing all of that data together, not just for aggregation, but also for analysis and then automation as well. So getting towards that remediation or automated remediation workflows that also Katie was referencing before. So I do see that intersection very clearly between exposure management or vulnerability management at ASPM. We see that at ArmorCode. We have customers leveraging us for both types of use cases as well as those use cases together. So I very much see that those two markets are kind of consolidating together that way. But yeah, I think there's definitely a world where you're bringing in data from the application security stack. They may have some dashboarding capabilities within their portfolio, but then we're also combining it with the CNAPS data as well. So we integrate with a whole bunch of AppSec tooling as well as a whole bunch of the CSPM and CNAP providers as well.
Yeah, sitting at the center of it all, literally.
Exactly.
Let me ask you, Katie. So Mark mentions that enterprises that he speaks with, they already have most, if not all, of their security scanners in place today. So what are enterprises actually looking for when they evaluate ASPM solutions today, based on your research?
Yeah. So when focusing in particularly on the enterprise, like you said, generally the ASPM use case isn't about replacement or replacing scanners. Like you said, they often already have a very, robust stack in place. They're generally looking for a way to bring order and efficiency to all of that complexity. And actually, one of the most interesting parts of doing this research, right, is I talked to and surveyed over 40 ASPM customers across all the different vendors in this research effort. And there were a couple of themes that really stood out from those conversations and from the enterprise perspective as it relates to ASPM. One being they're really looking for that central source of truth. Enterprises told me that they don't want every team managing their own list of vulnerabilities. They're looking for ASPM to sort of serve as that central hub. And a customer quote I have that I thought summed it up well. They said, "My goal was a source of truth. I have to bring all my vulnerabilities in one place, contextualize them, and add ownership and environment. Otherwise, it's impossible to manage." And then along with that is this need for comprehensive visibility and discoverability. We say this quite often, but it's very true that you can't secure what you can't see. And so enterprises really want to know that they have full coverage across all their environments. And that means not just scanned code, right? But as we've been talking about, unmanaged assets, repos, cloud resources, all of these things can influence the security of your applications. And then third, I really saw this need for that seamless integration and remediation as it relates to the developer environment and workflow. Enterprises really don't want developers hunting in a separate console. Developers are not users typically of the ASPM platform itself, right? They want a platform that's going to deliver that actionable automated fixes in their existing workflows, even to the point where looking more towards those click to accept automated remediation. And I had one customer tell me, they said, security works best when it's behind the scenes. Developers should just see the fix, not the friction. And I thought that was such an excellent way to phrase the need for remediation as part of ASPM. And then I think, especially in the enterprise, ASPM needs to be really adaptable to complex environments. When you think about enterprises, they often have a large M&A history that brings in its own tool stack that makes this problem of, varied AppSec tools often even worse. And, we really find that enterprises, need something that can scale across diverse technology stacks, multiple providers. And for instance, one customer said, you name a technology, you name a cloud provider, we use it somewhere, right? And they want to be able to tap into all of that. Third, a topic that came up a lot, and this makes sense because ASPM really is a data problem, right? That reporting and dashboarding and metrics is a huge part of a quality ASPM platforms. Enterprises have to communicate security posture to multiple stakeholders, not only to developers like we've talked about, but to executives, to auditors. Yeah. I had one customer that said, auditors love their PDFs, right? Well, another one said that they want to be able to build in-depth technical reports that are very catered to the need of a particular external audience. So, for enterprises, having those flexible dashboards that are customizable, APIs to interact with and pull data into other tools, and the ability to sort of generate those tailored reports was a really high need for the enterprise. And then finally, I think partnership is something we probably don't market a lot as vendors in a space, but I think the one thing I really saw was leaders in the MarketScape really felt their customers really felt that the vendor they worked with was a partner, that they were responsive, they valued collaboration. I had one say, you don't just go with a vendor who takes your money. You want one who listens and who makes the product better, because that makes your program better too. And so I think that just really sums up the importance of, it's not just about the technology.
Absolutely. Got some notes here. M&A, diverse teams and business units, customization, scale. Mark, does this align with what you're hearing from ArmorCode customers as well when it comes to this enterprise needs and requirements?
Yeah, it's very much. I love that quote, Katie. Something that's without the friction. That we'll have to come back to that, because I love that. That's perfect. And I think that's kind of like when you think about an ASPM, one of its biggest jobs is to contextualize the data. That means to bring it all together, is to correlate it with asset inventory information, so you know who owns the problem. So if I've got a runtime container security issue, I want to be able to trace that all the way back to the code and then the developer responsible for that. So then I can deliver the developer contextualized information as to why this is important with threat intelligence, with runtime information, but deliver it directly into the workflow that they're using. So whether that's a ticket in Jira or something like we have a plugin for Jira that gives you immediate and dynamic information from ArmorCode, you're able to perform actions within Jira rather than having to come out of that and go into into a different system that you're not used to. But it's also things like MCP servers, where you're giving access within the development environments and the modern development environments, where you can actually have natural language conversations with that data that's being contextualized and prioritized and delivered to the development team so that they can execute on their remediation workflows.
Very cool. I'm looking at the clock, folks, and I realize that we're up on our time here. We're going to keep going. I promised you a fireside chat. We've got the special guests with us today, so we're going to keep going. If you have to drop, I totally understand. This recording will be distributed, but we've got some great set of questions here I want us to get a chance to get to. Basically, we have so many logs on the fire, it's just going to keep burning hot. So let's keep going here. Katie, let me ask you another question here. Where does ASPM rank in the top security budget priorities that you're seeing? Of course, all this comes down to money, comes down to what's the ROI. What do you feel is driving that investment when it comes to ASPM?
Yeah, I did some recent research on this topic. I love to do surveys when data oriented, right? And so in the most recent survey that I ran back in July, I did a lot of questions around AppSec budgets. And the one thing we found was that ASPM came in as a top 5 investment priority when it looked to sort of the high level things in application and software supply chain security for the year of 2025. And if you see, about a quarter of organizations named it as one of their top 3 areas of spend that they were planning for this year. And, this puts, as you can see, ASPM right alongside some of the most established categories in the AppSec stack, like application security testing tools, API security solutions, and security training, right? And then we also see new categories, really emerging rapidly, such as those tools that are being used to secure Gen AI and AI agents, which are now, rivaling testing as, the very top of the list. And I think, to just comment on, I think what's driving this momentum is, I think ASPM's ability to help organizations get more value out of their existing investments. Budgets are not unlimited, and most enterprises already have years of spend sunk into scanners, cloud security platforms, DevOps tooling. ASPM, I think, is attractive because it doesn't necessarily require rip and replace, and it can act as sort of that force multiplier, unifying those investments and creating more efficiency. And also, security leaders, they're really under pressure to show measurable risk reduction and efficiency gains without, additional headcount. Hiring is often a problem right now. And, ASPM supports that by consolidating across fragmented tools and really streamlining workflows and providing those metrics they need to be able to demonstrate that risk reduction, right? So I think overall, the budget momentum really reflects this practical reality that ASPM is, I think, being increasingly viewed as a very strategic enabler, and it's, amplifying the value of that broader security stack.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Mark. Please.
I was going to say, I think it further emphasizes something we started the conversation with today as well, which is the adoption of AI is exploding developer productivity. Now, today, as an industry, we're very focused on the volume of code means more vulnerabilities, but we all know that the LLMs and the AI code assistants are getting better and better. They are Microsoft, the Copilot, they're embedding 𝘁=QL directly into that, so it's actually going to not be delivering poorly written code. Maybe we should have done that the first time, but okay, they're doing it now. But that ultimately means is that volume of code is actually probably going to be better than it would have been with a human. But the whole point is you've got so many more applications and so many more frequent changes. And we all know that security is not a point in time. It's as a new exploit comes out, as Log4j taught us, all of a sudden a whole bunch of systems that are out there now have got exploited high severity issues within them. So I think that this conversation that we're having in the industry today around AI and it's really going to explode even further as we get better quality code out of the LLMs. The vulnerability count problem goes away, but your attack surface increases. The more applications, and ASPM, in my mind, is the only way to keep up with that, through the discovery, through the automation, through the contextualization. It's the only way to really optimize those workflows so that you can keep, as a security team, on the productivity gains that the rest of the organization is facing.
Well said. Good question for Katie. From an industry analyst perspective, what should organizations consider when evaluating AI capabilities in these ASPM platforms?
Yeah. I think from my perspective as an analyst, and this is what I'm always trying to do and encourage organizations to do as well, is to sort of cut through, that marketing and think critically about how these capabilities are applied. So for instance, vendors are layering in this AI generated fix suggestions, right? But the question is like whether those suggestions are accurate, right? If AI creates noise instead of clarity, it erodes trust. So ask questions like, what's the acceptance rate of an AI suggested fix? Or can we track accuracy over time? Do we have the ability to approve, reject, or customize what the AI is suggesting for remediations before we apply them? And another thing is we're talking a lot about agents right now, right? In security.
Yeah.
And not every feature labeled as an agent is truly agentic. They haven't figured that out yet. And, a useful distinction here is whether the AI is simply assistive, it's generating a recommendation that the human still has to must take an action on, or is it actually agentic? It's able to be, take autonomous action with defined guardrails, such as routing a finding, opening a ticket, applying a remediation. So when it comes to ASPM, when vendors make claims about being agentic, it's important to look at, questions around like what guardrails are in place, how is autonomy scoped, how are things monitored, audited, does this capability truly act independently, or is it still having some level of human trigger involved? So I think in short, when looking at AI and ASPM or any really application security tool, you have to be, critical. It's not really a matter of whether it exists, but probing those questions of like how it works, how it's controlled, and ultimately, does it deliver value without adding additional risk?
Yeah, I think the key thing is, does it deliver on an outcome? right? It's like, it's great that we all go to those conferences where everybody now has an AI moniker in front of everything that they're doing, right? And you have to be pragmatic to say, is like, okay, is the outcome what I actually need? Because AI isn't the answer for everything. I mean, we have a lot of core AI capabilities built into the platform, but at the same time, not everything is AI. Not everything should be. You want to be able to focus on, can you achieve the outcomes you need to have? And one of the other challenges, I don't know if you've noticed, Katie, as well, but the non-deterministic nature of LLMs does lead to a lot of angst within the security industry. There is a question right now of, as an industry, if we're ready for truly autonomous agents, or if it's really kind of like you still need that human in the loop. And I tend to see that most organizations are moving in the direction, but we're still at that point of human in the loop is a critical component.
No, I agree. And it goes along with even just automated remediation that's LLM based. One problem I often run into is that the LLM will generate different remediations like every time that you run it, right? That if there's not that combination of both, Gen AI and also maybe some sort of guardrails or deterministic kind of gates around it, then oftentimes you'll get a different response. You could have the same vulnerability in the same code base and get a different remediation each time, just because of the nature of AI, right? So agreed. We're still, I think, in that either human in the loop, moving towards I think IDC likes to phrase it as human on the loop as we move towards agents, right? But I don't think we're totally towards like no human involvement whatsoever, right?
No, I think most people's jobs are safe. So yeah.
Agreed.
Well, let's get to some final thoughts then. Katie, what would one key takeaway be for our audience?
Yeah, I think, my biggest takeaway from doing this research is that I really think that ASPM isn't like just another tool category. And we've touched on this, right? How it kind of cuts across everything that an enterprise is using. And I think what I'm starting to see with this investment data in budgets from the customer conversations I had doing the MarketScape, that enterprises are really beginning to view ASPM almost as an operating model for application security, that, it becomes this layer that organizes all of their existing tools and investments, standardizes how, security findings are managed, and really creates consistency across teams when it comes to application security. And so, ASPM isn't about necessarily replacing what you already have, right? It's about giving structure, coherence to programs that really have become way too complex to run in the silos that they're in right now. And so in that sense, I think ASPM, I really feel like is becoming, it's not a point solution, right? It's more of becoming a framework for, I think the best way to put it is like how AppSec gets done.
Well, I like that. I like that. Mark, how about you? Any last parting thoughts for our audience?
Well, I think it's important as I love that's another quote that I love, like it's how AppSec gets done, right? But for me, it's not just the traditional AppSec of the code centric stuff, it's everything, right? It's how does secure software get delivered, and how do we keep up with the pace that's coming from our delivery teams, our engineering teams, but also the pace of the threat actors as well, and how do we kind of like normalize, rationalize, kind of focus down and do it in the most effective way possible. And to be able to achieve that, you need to have a solution that's orientated around exactly that problem, rather than the find. It's how do we fix? And that's where this is a segment that obviously I'm very passionate about, and it's an area where I think it's the only way to operationalize the massive volume of data that we've got within the industry, and operationalize it in the most effective way possible.
Well, I want to thank Katie and Mark once again. Thank you both for coming on and sharing your knowledge and your experience, your expertise around this research, Katie. My gosh, there's so much out there, out on IDC. If you're an IDC client, I'm sure you can get access to all of the other reports that you dropped in the last couple of weeks alone, and all the trends that you're seeing in the industry. Folks, if you'd like, you can take out your phones and hit up the QR code on the left here. This will get you a copy of the IDC MarketScape for ASPM. This is the vendor assessment for 2025 that Katie has researched and authored. And that'll bring you right to the ArmorCode website, where we are hosting a free excerpt copy for you to grab and take a look at it. Get into the data and look at what Katie has to say about the industry. Hear what Katie has to also say about ArmorCode ourselves, and why folks are considering ArmorCode, specifically around enterprise size organizations. And also on the right hand side, take your same phone, grab that QR code, and you can check out our entire library of our Let's Talk ASPM podcast that Mark hosts. I've had the privilege of also being on with a couple of them with Mark, as well as hearing directly from a lot of our customers who Mark has been able to interview, as well as Raj and the rest of our team. So with that, I want to thank you again for coming out today and giving us your time and your attention, and we really appreciate that.